All right, well, let's pray. Father in heaven, again, we thank you for this time together and the desire for each one to learn more about your word. Open our hearts and minds, help us to be receptive, help us to understand and comprehend the uniqueness of the Bible and its reliability as we look at it in context. Guide and direct our time and our thoughts together, for we ask it in Christ's name, amen.
Thank you for getting that.
Yeah, praise the Lord for that. Anyway, this is Google Earth, and of course, we'll be looking tonight at a couple different places. Specifically, we're going to go into the beginning of the Exodus and talk a little bit about Moses and what we know, and then go into the route of the Exodus, taking us down over into Sinai. I like it because with Google Earth, you can now type in almost any archaeological site. There's Gezer, Israel. I wonder who works there. And it takes you right there to Gezer. There it is. That's Kibbutz Gezer. Our site is just to the south. And there she is right there, Tel Gezer. So you can see it. But again, man, I don't know if I can adjust the screen or what it is. The resolution. Just not very clear. But anyway, there's Tel Gezer. And there's our water system right there. Anyway, that big hole. As well as we'll be looking at tonight, we want to go to Pithon. I don't think it'll. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. It'll find it. You ever heard of Pithon? Pithom. See where it takes us? Nowhere. So let's try Avaris. You heard of Avaris? Avaris, Egypt. A-G-Y, I can't type upstanding, but let's take us. Oh, there we go. Avaris is Tanis, which is also, could be the possible Pyramses. There you go. You just have to know all the different names for it, but you can find all that just with your Google browser open. So it's pretty nice. But we're going to be looking tonight at the location of Israel. And again, you see very carefully the uniqueness of Israel, or the uniqueness of Egypt. It's surrounded basically by desert, obviously. Anybody remember the name of the desert?
Sinai?
No, Sinai's over here. What's this desert? Sahara Desert. And of course, next to the Sinai, you have the other big desert, which is this one, is what? No. Arabian Desert. So those are the two big deserts, the Sahara. And you can see basically all of Egypt is basically desert. Basically all of Mesopotamia and Arabia, not very good on this projection here, but it's all desert. All of this is desert. So the only thing that keeps Egypt alive, as we may mention, was the Nile River. And of course it flows from north to south, and it empties out into this Nile Delta. This is called the Nile Delta. Egypt is divided off into 4 parts. You have, that's what I said. That's what I didn't say. No. It flows to the north, obviously. That's what I said. Flows and empties out into the Nile Delta. And as you can see, it's very lush and green. Very hospitable place. But basically, the civilization of Egypt obviously grew along the Nile River. The delta is, of course, one of the most luscious areas, as you've got this little jetty point out here, which would be Alexandria, and then Rosetta. That name sounds familiar, doesn't it? Where they found the Rosetta Stone. Anyway, the Nile branches off to about 8 tributaries. Now it's down to about 6. And you can really, if you have, I can see them on mine, but I guess you can see them on yours, on this here, but you can see the tributaries flowing out along the Nile Delta. So Egypt has the Nile Delta, the Nile Valley, the second part, and then the deserts, specifically the east and the west, splitting, of course, the Sahara Desert in half is the Nile River. Well, Egypt, by and large, was isolated, all right? You really had to plan your strategy well to attack Egypt because you had to go through, of course, parts of the Sinai Desert, then cross through the Delta, and then also maybe parts of the Nile River to take control of Egypt. So Egypt, basically in ancient times, was isolated, and it gave it a sense of security. And I think we talked about this the first week, but security and, of course, of uniformity, because everything basically functioned the same day in and day out. The sun, the Nile flooding. And so it basically was a very nice compact area all throughout most of its history. Well, tonight we want to look at, we'll come back to that and look at this. As you can see, of course, this would be the canal that is dug that separates today Egypt from the Sinai. And that what's the name of the canal? The Suez Canal, all right? And there's only certain places you can cross over as you take a look through on Google Earth. There's actually, and this folks, the internet here is a little slow, so focusing makes it a little difficult. But you can see they put a bridge. It's not completely built yet, or it is. And it wasn't built when I made my last trip about 6 years ago. We had to take a ferry across to get across the Suez Canal and then on into, all the way down into Cairo. But as I said, Google Earth is a nice tool to play with. Most all archaeological sites are on Google Earth now. So there's no excuse for you not knowing your geography. As I made mention, there are 2,000 cities mentioned in the Bible. And of course, the ancients knew exactly their significance in most cases. The Bible just assumes you know. That's why there's no lengthy explanation about cities. They just mentioned them, and everybody knew basically their significance and their function. And so there was no explanation needed to give. And basically there isn't, except for one text where they thought it was kind of funny in the book of Judges, where the tribe of Benjamin was almost wiped out. And they complained, if you remember the last few stories of the book of Judges, they complained they had no more wives. And they said, well, you can go to the Sadie Hawkins Day up there at Shiloh and grab yourself a wife. And they said, well, we don't even know where it's at. And they gave a description of where Bethel was, or Shiloh, and as it talks about south of Lebona. But anyway, a nice little geographical description which fits perfectly with the biblical text, or the geography of the land of Israel. So we'll come back to this. Let's go take a look at our lecture tonight. We want to go into back into the Exodus and talk about where do these people reside? What do we know about the beginning of Israel's occupation down in Egypt? Of course, you know that Abraham descendants via Jacob had, in fact, that it was even predicted earlier in Genesis chapter 39 that that Israel would go and have to tarry in Egypt. Again, there's no explanation why. The Bible doesn't tell us why they had to go down in Egypt, but he said, you're going to go. And of course, they stayed there for 400 years. And we remarked very significantly how that Israel, while in Egypt, never lost their identity. Amazing. Amazing. Every other country in the ancient world, from the Midianites, Amalekites, the Jebusites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, they all lost their identity. But the Jews haven't. Amazing. Well, we want to look at the book of Exodus, specifically as we look at who do we think the Pharaoh is. He's not mentioned in the Bible. The name Pharaoh, of course, is given, and I think I gave you the definition last week of what Pharaoh means. Do you remember what the word Pharaoh means? Great house. Great house. Because he was deified eventually. Actually, after the first campaign, unification of Egypt by Narmer, he was deified and was seen as a deity. And you can see in most cases like this relief down below, he's always bigger than life. And this is the famous Ramses the Great. Some people believe the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And we'll talk about that tonight as well. Anyway, he has a beautiful monument down in Aswan, which is as far south as you can go on the Nile by boat before you get into the rapids, the cataracts they're called. And there are some beautiful etchings. As I told you, he became king about 25 years of age and ruled for 67 years. and he was a very prolific builder all throughout his kingdom. Many statues dedicated to Ramses. Even in the middle of the highway there at Cairo, the modern highway splits because there's a huge granite statue of Ramses in the ground that was being carved, and it broke and it was not able to be lifted out. And so now you have to make a detour around Ramses II statue. Amazing. And even in the UN building, I believe it's the UN, one of the buildings here in the United States, there's an inscription of Ramesses above the entrance that says, if you think you can beat me and be greater than I am, all the more power to you. I just read that. I didn't know that was true, but I think it is the UN, one of the buildings. I don't have to look it up again, but you can look it up on Google. Just check it out yourself. Amazing. Well, as we were looking at the Bible in context, let me offer you some good books if you're into this. This is one of the most conservative evangelical Egyptologists in the world. He teaches at Trinity College in Indiana, Illinois. Illinois, yep, down the road from University of Chicago. His name is Hoffmeyer. I would love to have Pastor somewhere down the line. Are you listening? We've talked about it several times. I have an archaeological conference dealing with the reliability of the Bible. Hoffmeyer was one of the guys I would certainly bring in, as well as several others. But Hoffmeyer has been digging in Egypt, and he was born in Egypt as a missionary son there in Egypt. He knows the language, knows the culture, been digging there for years at a couple key sites, which we're going to look at when we talk about the route of the Exodus. He has two books, Ancient Israel in Sinai, and that deals with the route of the Exodus, the wilderness wanderings, and then Israel in Egypt, which came before the previous book. Both of them are probably the most detailed work available today, outlining the occupation of Israel in Egypt. I wanted to be an Egyptologist, but I mean, there's certainly some biblical history down there, but Israel just had a more appeal to me, and so I majored in Israel and not in Egypt. Although I've dug on the border with Egypt, a place called Tel Afara South, but never had the opportunity to really sink my trowel in nice soft sand in Egypt. A whole lot better digging down there. Just have to take a hard broom, but nonetheless. Hoffmeyer is his name, Hoffmeier. James Hoffmeyer, excellent scholar. He has a lot of YouTube videos, by the way. So if you're interested in listening to his lectures, just type in Hoffmeyer and go into YouTube, and you'll pull up a lot of his lectures on Egypt and Israel and his excavations down there in Egypt, which I mimic, obviously, because he's the expert. And this is one of the problems with biblical scholars, specifically when you go and you start reading commentaries and other, quote, works on the history of Israel. Most of them are not trained Egyptologists. And so they will start commenting that Israel can never have been in Egypt. It just doesn't make sense. We have no records. The description in the biblical text doesn't match up. And all the Egyptologists, especially Hoffmeyer and another fellow by the name of Kenneth Kitchen, which I gave you his book last week, The Reliability of the Old Testament, also an Egyptologist. This is probably more knowledgeable than any of you in Hoffmeyer, if you could be. But they say the problem with these guys is that they're not Egyptologists. They never talk to Egyptologists. We can tell you, we can show you very clearly that the biblical evidence lines up well. And so they really ridicule biblical scholars that are not Egyptologists and are afraid to ask them the needed information. So keep that in perspective. So let's talk a little bit about Israel in Egypt. It's called the land of Goshen. I told you that was my mother's most derogatory word she could say when she got mad, being a pastor's wife. She couldn't use, of course, any profanity, but she'd always say, good land of Goshen. This very day. I'll never forget her. Good land of Goshen, obviously. Anyway, in Genesis 45:10, it says, and you shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, and your children, and your children's and children, and your flocks, and your herds, and all that you have. And you shall live in the land of Goshen. Again, I don't know there's no specific reason why given in the biblical text. Maybe to identify, maybe Of course, later on we have the people of Israel as they, of course, formed a bond, a unity, and Moses comes back and says, hey, here's your God. His name is Yahweh, your God of your father Abraham and your patriarchs. And they said, yeah, right. And God said, well, stand back. I'm going to show you something. And 10 plagues happened. And then, of course, the institution of the Passover in the book of Exodus is also unique. All of these, of course, specifically the Passover, was a symbol of what is yet to come. That, of course, the ultimate Passover sacrifice, Jesus Christ. So the narrative is always there. I told you that probably the significant narrative of the Old Testament is salvation history. Salvation history seems to be the dominant theme all the way through, from Genesis with Adam and Eve, the sin, of course the expulsion, then the choosing of Abraham, the choosing of developing a race by which the Savior would come. Wow. Thousands of years of history in the making. Unbelievable. Well, Goshen is the name is only found 15 times in the Old Testament. It's basically, of course, mainly used in Genesis and more so in Exodus. But we're not real sure of its meaning. There's a lot of different ideas about it, but not real sure. We're not even real sure of its location. Outside of the Bible, there are a few references in Egyptian literature, but they don't give any identifying marks as to exactly where it is. So if you read very carefully Genesis chapter 47, verses 6 and 11, you'll see that it's synonymous with the land of Ramses. The land of Ramses. Again, so there are, in the Bible, indicators. Again, why did God put this in there? Because He knew that somewhere down the line people would question whether there was a land of Goshen. But He says, you know what? It's also known as the land of Ramses. Well, we all know who Ramses is. So I'm telling you, little subtle things like this. If the Bible is inspired by God, then every word is significant. You can't leave things out. You have to study the whole text, even all those long lists of names which you hate to pronounce when you're asked to read in Sunday school class. No, not me. Sorry. Just remember, a vowel never comes first in Hebrew. Always the noun. So you can look at the names. Always start with a consonant, not a vowel. I gave you that lesson for free. All right? Yeah. So anyway, here we know where the land of Ramses was because he builds. In fact, you have two references in the book of Exodus talking about two cities that the Israelites worked on, Pi-Ramesses and Pithon. Pi-Ramesses and Pithon. And we're going to look at those tonight. They have been excavated, but even then we're not sure exactly of their location. All right? The key city in this area is called Tanis, Zoan, Tanis, up here. This was the capital of an invading army that came down into Egypt called the Hyksos. Hyksos. The Hyksos. They're not mentioned in the Bible. But somewhere around the 17th century, the middle of the 17th century, the Hyksos, they're Canaanites, invaded the land and kicked out the Pharaoh and began to rule Egypt from the Nile Delta. I don't know, somewhere down the line, we might come to find out that the Hyksos are the Israelites. Just a lot of things up in the air. But again, remember, the book is interested in God. It's not interested in you knowing specifically the history. It's interested in knowing what God can do for you and has done in the past. Remember, Paul says very clearly what the purpose of the Old Testament is. It's for our example, to learn. All right? So anyway, very significant. And there's the Goshen, G-S, W is an S, and an N. Goshen. All right? So this is the Nile Delta. So we put Goshen somewhere down in this area. Why? Because, let me go back to Google Earth. Oh, I like Windows 10. See that, what you can do with Windows 10? Oh, sweet. Anyway, you can see very clearly here, there's only really one way in to the land of Egypt. That's up through a huge valley called the Wadi Tumelet. Wadi Tumalit, which is right here by Pithon. Pithon sits on it. Coming out of Timnash, there's a wadi that crosses. What do you think? In fact, later on, the Israelites are going to cross what sea? Wrong. Reed Sea. Yam Suf. Suf never means red. Suf means reed. It's the seed of reeds. Mistranslation in the King James Bible. Seed of reeds, which is very helpful when we come to talk about what happens. But this is where you can cross, right below that lake there called Lake Timcha. Timcha, you can cross in. And let's see if the Google Earth came through yet. Well, this is very significant. Why the land of Goshen? There are some unique facts about the land of Goshen. Because to date, no evidence has been found that the Israelites are there in the land of Goshen. There's no manuscripts, there's no inscriptions, nothing. And so it's like finding a needle in a haystack, all right? Because the Nile Delta produces its own significant problems. Number one, the fact that it imposes further limitations upon the inquiry because the delta is alluvium. You all remember what alluvium is from your high school days? It's water-carried soil, alluvium. And guess what? It makes mud deposits throughout most of the region, specifically with the Nile floods. And what did the ancients write on back then, specifically out of Egypt? Some clay tablets, but mainly papyrus. Have you stuck papyrus in water lately? Does it survive? No. Hardly any manuscripts have come out of this whole region. Any regions. In fact, it has no source of stone even within it. It all has to be hauled up from different regions. So it's mud and wattle, and mud brick structures were limited in duration, obviously. All right. In fact, you know what the ancients, if they find mud brick today, you know what they do with it? Because it had the straw in it, the chemicals actually turns the mud brick into fertilizer. And they use it, they crumble it, and use it as fertilizer for their land. So most of the mud brick houses are gone. And they have been from ancient times. Amazing. There's no traces, as I said, of the Hebrews that have ever been found. So, of course, the scholars say, well, obviously then there's no Exodus. But they're wasting their breath. The mud hovels of brick fields, slaves, and humble cultivators have long since gone back to their mud origin. You understand? And they're never to be seen again. The mud just dissipates. I told you that's a problem for archaeologists. All we ever find basically, unless it's made out of stone, is the remains, mud brick deterioration. And it lasts about 3 years if you don't keep it up. Plastered the walls they had to, over and over again. Plastered your roofs. Then you had that famous phrase I like so much in the book of Proverbs. A nagging woman is like a drop in a bucket. Drip. You know, we got to turn the faucet off. It's enough. I can't stand it, you know, and the drip, drip. Why? Because their roof leaked. And so you put the bucket down there to collect the water. If you didn't patch it.
Proverbs what?
I don't remember. It's right off bat. But Proverbs, it's in the 30s, I think. But anyway, very common proverb. So, as I said, stone structures such as temples even hardly survive. Scarce wonder that there are no written records, obviously. All right? All of the 99%, the best that we can determine, 99% of any... Oh, can you write on the screen? Just noticed that. No. 99% have disappeared of what we know of. It should have been there at these capitals. Has disappeared, all the papyrus. We get less than 1%. Wow. So, are we going to find any records of the Pharaoh and so on? No. In fact, the Pharaoh himself, do you think he's ever going to record a defeat? There are no defeats recorded in any of the Pharaoh's literature that they wrote on the temple walls and that they wrote at their monumental buildings. They never wrote that I got my, my behind kicked, whooped. In fact, this great Ramesses, later in his years, was afraid that the Hittites, which was another people that up to about 100 and something years ago thought they never existed because they had no evidence for them. And of course, their whole cities have been uncovered, of which this guy Hoffmeyer is an expert on Hittite language as well. But anyway, he fights. He's afraid the Hittites are going to come down and swallow his land, so he mounts a campaign. He gets all the way up into northern Lebanon, parts of Syria, in a month, and he's ready to do battle with the Hittites. But the Hittites, well, actually, they capture a few Hittites, spies, and they force them to say, yeah, the Hittites are up there waiting for you, and they're at this location. But they lied. They were actually in ambush. And when Ramesses came up there, they ambushed him, and they almost wiped him out. If Ramesses had not had another contingency of troops coming up another way. And they fought, and it was a draw. It was a match. But yet, when you go and read his relief down in Egypt at Karnak, he says, and I defeated the Hittites. No, he didn't. In fact, he offered his daughter in marriage, which is very rare. In fact, that's one of only 2 cases. The only other case we know of Pharaoh offering his daughter in marriage is Solomon. Because through the female, remember, in Egyptian theology, the land rights passed. The women owned the land. Therefore, as I made mention a while back, the Pharaoh had to marry his sister. So, very interesting. So, no temples anywhere are going to talk about the defeat of the Israelites. So why would they mention them? They don't. In fact, I told you also significant is the literary style here. You have no Pharaoh mentioned all the way through the book of the Pentateuch, do you? Nothing in Joshua. Nothing in Judges. Your first Pharaoh is not mentioned till the book of Kings. Kings. When Solomon dies, Pharaoh Shishonk as he's known, comes up. The first time in the 10th century BC, you have the mention of a Pharaoh. Guess what? That matches perfectly with the literature of the day. No pharaohs are mentioned till about 1000 BC, just like the biblical text supports. Amazing. Wow. Well, here's Egyptian chronology. If you would like a copy of this, I will send a copy to Larry, and maybe he can put it up on the web page. Can you do that, Larry? Or Jim? I like Larry for some reason, because there's an ice cream shop, I think, called Larry's. All right. Your brother, can he do it for me? I will try to send some of this stuff to Jim and let Jim post it for you. All right. But anyway, this is the Egyptian chronology, because look in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 8, again, an indicator. There arose a new king who knew nothing of Joseph. Rose in power of Egypt. Who's this new king? Wow. Well, here you have, Egypt is basically divided off into several different periods, and we showed you this earlier. But it's in the second intermediate period, is it called. Now you're learning some Egyptian history. You don't mind that, do you? Okay. Here are the people known as the Hyksos that come in right here. We know them because the word Hyksos means foreigners. They mean foreigners, or shepherds, foreigners. They're Canaanites, but the Egyptians talk about them. The Hyksos coming in and taking over their throne. And they rule and they dominate all the way till the 18th dynasty, when this guy called Amos, oh, look at his name, Moses. A lot of Moses, Thutmose, a lot of Moseses. All right, Amos the first, 1550, that gives us, by the way, the division for what we call the late Bronze Age, 1550 down to 1200 BC. Anyway, he comes on the scene and he kicks them out. He chases them all the way into the land of Palestine, right on their tail, taking some of their cities, and utterly, he says, destroys the Hyksos. Is this the new king that arises? Don't know. The Bible just doesn't say. The Bible just doesn't say. Is it him? Some people even, there's a guy named David Roll. You might want to check out his videos. I don't agree with him, but he's making great inroads. His name is O-H-L, David. He's a British guy, and I was just posting some new pictures online or on Facebook, because I just ran across him. There's a guy named Eric Klein that I've dug with. I shouldn't even mention this, but I dug with for years, and he's director of a couple major digs. And I said, let me tell you, Eric got his training from me because he never dug anything at Megiddo that I know of. So I posted a picture of him walking, sitting beside me doing nothing. I said, see, and that was back in 1998, and so he commented on it, but said, yeah, right. Actually, he got his start before I did, digging actually Mediterranean sites and not in Israel. But he was the co-director of Megiddo, and then eventually has his own site called Kabri. But anyway, very fascinating. Anyway, David Roll is his name, and so he commented about that picture and Eric Klein and how it all came to be. But anyway, he's got a new book out. He wants to push the chronology off by about almost 800 years, totally revamp everything. And most scholars don't agree with him at all, Hoffmeyer included, Kitchen, some of the others. But fascinating study on the chronology. How do you get absolute dates of things? And that's what we have to work off. We do have a few absolute dates mentioned in the Bible, right? The destruction of Jerusalem, Sennacherib's capturing of Hezekiah. We have the building of the temple with Solomon. We do have about 3 or 4 major absolute dates. Those are critical for biblical studies, absolute dates. They're rare, but we have a few that confirm very well with outside text. Again, who the Pharaoh is going to depend on the dating of the events. Roll wants to push it all the way back into the Middle Kingdom, way back into the 1800s, even earlier than that. Most scholars do not agree with him. Anyway, the 18th dynasty, as I showed you, with Ahmose the First, and then the big bad boy called Thutmose the Third. Before him is the queen Hatshepsut. And I showed you a temple, I think, of her last week. Hatshepsut. A lot of people think if you take, we'll get into it, there's 2 dates, and I think I made mention of this. There's an early date and a late date, based upon the reference to Solomon. And I also have some handouts on that I'll send to Jim, and Jim can post for you on Blackboard, that shows you the comparison between the early and late date and what scholars say, biblical scholars as well. There's no unanimity among this at all. I still hold to a early date based upon the 2 clear references. Solomon says it's been 480 years since we came out of Egypt. And that would put it back to this time period of Hatshepsut of the 15th century, 1440, 1450 BC, right in this area. Anyway, there are some tangible evidence for this thing, mainly because Hatshepsut had another son, and Thutmose did not like it. Some people think that other son is Moses. Anyway, Thutmose III wreaks havoc. In fact, he conquers, goes all the way up into Palestine, conquers even the great city of Megiddo. But nonetheless, so the 18th dynasty is great, is a powerful. It's probably the high point of Egyptian history. It goes all the way down to the time of Solomon, as you can see close to, at least Saul and David. All right, 20th dynasty and down into the 21st dynasty. I told you, if you remember my first presentation, I gave you a talk about Gezer, where we found the jar stoppers, and one had a seal impression in it, and it was a guy by the name of Seaman. He falls right in here in the 21st dynasty. The pharaohs aren't listed here, but Seaman falls right in here. So anyway, kind of interesting. So Egyptian chronology is critical. Just remember the Hyksos. They could be the Israelites. Again, it's still unclear exactly what's transpiring here. Some people believe so. Anyway, there's an early date, pushing it back into Hatshepsut, and there's a late date, which would put it during the time of Ramesses, the great Ramesses II, that we looked at, and we'll look at again here in a moment. Fascinating study. Well, the Hyksos transformed, as I may mention, Avaris, which I tried to show you on Google Earth. It's also known as Tel el-Daba. Tel el-Daba, all right? Wow, throw that term out there. I always tell this to my classes over there at Valencia, and I say, guys, here's a great pickup line, you know? What do you think about Tel el-Daba? in the land of Goshen. So far, I have not heard of any great success, but it does make you sound intellectual, huh? Tel El-Daba is what is believed to be their capital, and it's known as Avaris, all right? The Hyksos developed and made alliances. In fact, these are Hyksos chariots. The Hyksos perfected the chariot. Perfected the chariot. And so very significant in the development. Again, that fits well with the Canaanites, what we do know. Remember I talked about the engineering of our tunnel? The Canaanites? Anyway, what is interesting is that they made contacts all across Anatolia, which is Turkey, of course, Turkey and Armenia, all the way over into Crete, where the Minoans lived. In fact, we have frescoes. In fact, the Hyksos hired Minoan sculptors and painters to come and decorate their palaces. And we found them. I'll show you in a moment. Hyksos chariots. Just type in the word Hyksos in Google, and you'll find them. Articles, and read it up on yourself. Anyway, this is Tel El-Daba, all right? All the way up at the top here where we believe Avaris is. And it's actually today, it's not, there's Tel El-Daba right there. Tel El-Daba by Qantir, the modern city of Qantir. This we believe is Avaris. And this has been excavated by an Austrian. His name is Manfred Bietak. Manfred Bietak. Anyway, here you can see, which we also think, I'll show you later on, which could be the sites of Pithon and Ramesses. A site called Tel El-Maskuta, or Tel El-Rebeta, or Tel Basi. I'm not real sure. This is the main gate in. This is that wadi I was telling you about. Remember, wadi is a valley. It means it's an Arabic word. The Hebrew word is Nahal. Nahal. If you go to Israel, you've been on the Israel guides. You've heard the guide. Everybody says wadi or Nahal. Nahal is the Hebrew term. Arabic is wadi. These are valleys, gorges. And this is one of them. And that's why these key cities are here. So that anybody coming in is going to have to get by Tel Maskuta, Tel Ribata, Safi al-Hena, and then Tel Abasi. All right? This is the gateway in right here. Otherwise, too marshy, full of lakes. In fact, even the topography has changed. There are other lakes that have long since been buried since the Exodus. So to trace out exactly where the Reed Sea is still a problem today. Well, here's Tel El-Daba. It's right in the middle of the heart of a city. And if you look online, you can see a lot of pictures of it, but I'll show you some I downloaded. I've of course, never been to Tel El-Daba, and I don't know if we want to go there yet today. It's still problematic, but I do notice that they are taking, I just noticed a couple of tour companies advertising going to Egypt, so apparently it's okay to go, so maybe. But I haven't heard of any problems. So, if you're not doing anything this winter, you like an expert guide, give me a call, and I'll be glad to go with you. Of course, slight fee. Go down to Tel El-Daba. We'll see if we can get up here, Tel El-Daba. So, anyway, this is the land of Goshen. It's the land of Ramesses, remember? Tel El-Daba, and it's excavated right here amidst of all these modern developments, Qantir, which makes it difficult to excavate. But the archaeologist has given a few pictures, and there he is. That's Manfred Bietak. He just lectured last year, and he'll be up. If you're really into this stuff, there's a big conference coming up in Atlanta, which is not too far away. And you can come in and enter. They don't police the site. A big hotel, the American Schools of Oriental Research. I will be lecturing. I offered my students, they can get out of a paper if they come up and hear me lecture, and a few others. A couple of years I've had several students come up. It was in Delaware a couple of years ago. I'll be lecturing on Canaanite cult. But anyway, it's ASOR, American Schools of Oriental Research, and it's in Atlanta. It's an 8-hour drive, but it starts November 18th, goes through the Sunday, the 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, and you can sit in on all the lectures. Every scholar in the world comes, basically, from all over the world. That's a small one, only about 1,200 scholars. The one after that, if you want to stay for that one you have to join to get in. It's called SBL. Well, you can get into the lectures. They don't police the lectures. But the book room, you have to, if you want to go to the book room, and every book vendor in the world is there. And it takes about 3 hours to go through all the book vendors. I mean, it's just one line after, like a big convention. It's at a convention center. And that one has about 10,000 scholars. Society of Biblical Literature, SBL. That starts Sunday and goes till Tuesday. SBL. And then, if you're really into it, you can go to the one before it. They all meet at about the same time. I'm also lecturing there on the Gezer Water Sauce system. It's called ETS, Evangelical. Yeah. Evangelical Theological Society. They don't police it either, but they do police the book room because they do have a big book selling venue there. But it's very cheap to get in. Like, maybe you want to subscribe. For $25, you get a journal. You get 4 issues a year. Keep up with the latest theology and history. And they produce a journal called JETS, Journal of Evangelical Theological Society. I'll be lecturing there on. It starts. I think Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. ETS, but they're all back to back, so you can go for a whole week of conference. Wow, amazing. Anyway, I don't have time for all of them, just these two, and then I have to go home for Monday. But anyway, this is BTOC. This is what he's excavated. We showed you a little bit about excavations, how they do it in squares or meters. He's uncovered some fantastic frescoes like this one here. I don't know if you can make it out, but the Minoans were into sport. Anybody remember what the sport the Minoans were into? I thought we'd practice it next week. Out here and there. No, bull leaping. Yeah, have a bull charge at you, and then do a handspring over the bull. Not kill the bull, handspring over the bull. That's what's actually pictured here. There's the bull, and there's a guy leaping over it. So, do we have any volunteers for next week? I'll get the bull. Jim in the back. You up for it?
Brother Larry.
Brother Larry. Where's Larry? Yeah.
Those frescoes in Knossos too on Crete.
Yeah, there's Knossos of Crete. There's a nice one. There's also one in Israel, at Kabri, where I dug. Eric Klein I was telling you about. In fact, the whole city is Minoan. Already there before Abraham came in. The Minoans are already traveling the world. I teach Greek and Roman history. You can take my other class. But yeah, there's one at Knossos, beautiful one. Yep, better as well as Agia Triada, another site. But anyway, what is interesting is they found donkey burials, typical of Asiatics. These are not Egyptians. These are Asiatics. Abraham was an Asiatic. I found the same type of donkey burial at Tel Haror, which is also a Hyksos site, the temple. I dug there for 5 years. We uncovered 2 donkey burials. This is not Egyptian practice. Hyksos. So the people living in this area are foreigners. They're not Egyptians. The Israelites could easily mix in with the Hyksos because they're just like them. You understand? Abraham was from Ur the Chaldees. He's a what? He's a Mesopotamian. Yeah, remember it says in Ezekiel 37, your father was a Hittite, your mother was a Canaanite. As he talks to Abraham, his descendants. That's where they came from, the same root stock. All Semitic, not Egyptian. Fascinating. Anyway, Tel Adaba, Varis, Pyrameses. He thinks it's Pyrameses. Other people don't think so, but he thinks it is. He's a gifted scholar. Interesting to listen to. I would have him, Hoffmeyer. Well, we wouldn't need both of them, but he'd be a good guy to talk about Asiatics in Egypt. So, anyway, Pastor, if you watch the video. Anyway, so here are the other possible locations for Pithon of Pyrameses, Tel Aripata, as I told you, Tel Mascuda. Both sit on that Wadi Tumalit, and there they are right here. Tel Mascuda, Tel Aripata. Most people think Tel Aripata is actually Pyrameses. Even some people think it's Pithon. So it's very problematic because we don't have any signs that says welcome to Pyrameses. Welcome to Pithon. Anyway, you can see where Alexandria is up here. There's Rosetta. There's the tributaries of the Nile Delta, the 2 major ones and then smaller ones off the site. Well, here's Tel Mascuda. Yes?
Where
Cairo, down here. Cairo, right where it starts to split. Cairo. Now, Jim and I got, when we were on our trip, and I'll show you probably next week, almost all the time, we crossed here and have some key sites, the route of the Exodus. We went to Fayum. A lot of people think the lake of Fayum, Jim, remember, believe that's the lake that Joseph built to save water because of the drought that was coming, the famine that was coming. Fayum is right there. Fascinating. I don't know. Anyway, this is Tel Mascuda. It too, hemmed in. It's a fascinating site. You ought to see the picture on the web. This is a sarcophagus, and there's another sarcophagus just thrown inside this one, sitting on above the ground. I'd love to take that home. I'd like to have it in our church. Offer it for maybe as a prize for who donates the most money. Could be buried in our cemetery out there with this sarcophagus, huh? By the way, I have a great plan too. I think we should buy a mountain and offer burials any way you like it. Roman, Egyptian pyramid, Hittite burial. Ever thought about that? I haven't seen anybody come up with that idea. Buy a mountain, offer a pyramid for yourself. Wow. I bet there'd be a lot of takers, huh? My buddy Speak and I were talking about that a couple of years ago, and we just started laughing. But we thought, hey, it's not a bad idea, huh? Anyway, sarcophagus? Anybody? Underground? Anyway, this is what we know about Tel Mascuda. This was excavated by a guy by the name of Holliday from the University of Toronto. He thinks it's Tel Mascuda here is Pi-Ramesses. Other things. This is Tel Ribita. Anyway, you can find all these things on Google Earth, which I was going to show you, but not connected. Anyway, of course, remember it says in Exodus 5:14, and the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten. And they demanded, hey, wherefore have ye not fulfilled your task both yesterday and today, making bricks? You haven't fulfilled your quota. You know what the quota was? We know exactly what the quota was. 2,000 bricks a day. 2,000 bricks a day. I'm going to make it harder. And they took away coarse straw. So I showed you this picture before, but here you go. You can actually see they collect the mud out of, remember the Nile floods? It produces pools of water. The water stands. It creates mud. They take the mud from that pool. They put it together and they knead it. All right? Carried it by jars, as you can see. Carried it by jars. It was kneaded. And then they added straw to it. What does straw do? Yeah, it holds it together and it adds plasticity. All right, plasticity. So it can be maneuvered a little bit. That's exactly right. I don't know if the Egyptians knew the science behind that, but the chemical does react to the straw does react to the clay, and so anyway, then they shaped it and left it to dry. Here you can actually see a guy working on recalibrating his tool. This is metal working up top here. I should have just took this register. This is metal working. They're making metal ingots here, and as they have the billows to make a blast furnace. This is also down in Israel. You can go see it at Tel Timnah by Eilat. But anyway, so they're making copper ingots here. You see, that's not bricks, copper ingots. Anyway, this comes from a vizier. His name is Rickemeyer. From 1450 BC, from his tomb, he has this painting in it. Amazing. Well, of course, all this labor, God raises up a deliverer. His name is Moses. Moses, of course, emerges, the greatest legislator, and that's supposed to be and prophet that we know of. You understand, a few people get to change the course of the world, but he's one of them. He's one of them. And he was so significant, he's mentioned significantly in the Bible over 600 and something times, almost 700 times in the Bible. Anyway, the Bible tells us many things about him, but his birth and the development is still an obscured mystery, full of legends and myths and ideas we just don't know. But the miracle of his rescue, did you know, resembles a well-known ancient Near Eastern story? His name is Sargon of Agag. the king who conquered from Akkad, who conquered the Sumerians and started the dynasty of Akkad, of which you get the word Akkadian language from. Yeah. Well, of course, a lot of images, paintings from the Renaissance of Moses being rescued from a basket. But look at this story. There he is, Sargon. Sargon, strong king, king of Akkad. Am I my mother? Am I? My mother was high priestess. My father I do not know. My parental kin inhabited the mountain region. My city of birth is Azuparion, which lies on the bank of the Euphrates. My mother, a high priestess, conceived me in secret. She bore me. She placed me in a reed basket. With bitumen, she caulked my hatch. She abandoned me in the river, from which I could not escape. The river carried me along to Agi, the water drawer. It brought me up. Agi, the water drawer, when immersing his bucket, lifted me up. Agi, the water drawer, raised me as an adopted son. Agi, the water drawer, set me to his garden. During my garden work, Ishtar loved me, so that 55 years I ruled as king. This happened in about, roughly about 20, right after the 2nd century BC. So about 500 years, 600 years before Moses. Almost identical story. Isn't that interesting? Whoa. So you can see what scholars do with that, huh? The Jews knew about this and they just copied the legend. Amazing. But nonetheless, it's a parallel. Remember what parallels do? The lines never what? They never meet. They never cross. It's just a parallel. Just a parallel. But a fascinating one nonetheless, at least. Anyway, Moses, of course, is an Egyptian word, mus, meaning to be born, usually associated with the name of a god. Ramesses means son of Ra. Thutmose means son of Thor. Anyway, there's Thutmose the third, and there's Ramesses. Wow, interesting. We know he was schooled in the Egyptian schooling system as a student, and here it's kind of hard to see, but these are students. They've got their scribe boards out, their laptops. This one's got an Apple. I think this one is an HP. Anyway, they're taking dictation. They're learning all the elements of a student. And there's a happy family. Look at that. Mother and father and the little children down below. There they are. I love the Egyptians' reliefs. They're always touchy-feely. Did you know that? Yeah. Look, she's touching him. His arm is around her. All the pharaohs, when they're next to their wife, go up to all the statues. You'll see that even though you don't see the arm around the back, her fingers are always coming out the side right here. They're always touching. King Tut, most intimate. Some of the pictures, it's his wife touching him. Very touchy people. Interesting. Yep. Anyway, who this guy is? He's a midget. We know of. And he is. He's a dwarf. And actually a pharaoh. But nonetheless. Well, we'll have to stop there. The Exodus and the date. There he is. If you saw the movie. The Exodus and the date. So we'll pick up. That's where we're going to leave off tonight. So any questions, comments?
Is there actual chariots that were found?
Oh, we found the only chariots we found so far is the one found in King Tut's tomb. We found remnants of pieces. Yep.
Nothing in the Red Sea.
Nothing in the Red Sea. Reed Sea. Nothing in the Reed Sea. Yeah. Nope. Nothing. Why would wood survive anyway?